welcome back to the show. I'm here with Charlie Arehart, veteran ColdFusion expert, and he helps optimize ColdFusion servers that are sick or slow. And he also does an enormous amount for the community on his website and on the CF411 website. And one of the things I've noticed him doing over the years is telling us about all the cool new stuff in different versions of ColdFusion. And what we're going to talk about today, and he's actually giving a talk at CF Objective on this, is what's new in CF 10, 11, and 2016 that you may have missed. And we're going to talk about why you might even care about that, because some of you listening may be thinking, CF 10, are you kidding? Well, we'll address that. And we'll look at some of the cool features you may have missed out on that came out in those. And we'll also look at some compatibility issues you might want to be aware of, and also how Adobe changed the licensing between different versions that some of you may have missed. So, and we'll have lots of resources if you want to learn more about this. So welcome, Charlie.
Howdy, sir. Long time no talk.
Yes, must have been last week. So,
right, just last week, yes.
Yes. But, you know, you've got such useful info, and you're giving 2 talks at CF Objective.
Right.
So I figured you deserve to have 2 podcast episodes.
Thanks,
So let's just get the elephant in the room out of the way. You know, CF10, it came out years ago. I mean, you were telling me before we started recording, it was 5 years. So
right.
It feels like more like 8 or 10 to me.
Right. Someone might think it was much longer. No, it was only 5 years ago. And so the whole reason that I'm doing this talk is that in the course of the troubleshooting that I do with people, sometimes they're coming to me saying, hey, we've just implemented CF 2016, or hey, we just implemented CF 11. And I go, cool, that should be pretty straightforward, you know, to go from 11 to 2016 or 10 to 11. And they'll go, yeah, no, we're coming from CF 9 or we're coming from CF 8. And you might be surprised how often that's true, but it is really very, very often that people are making that big of a jump. And so I will frequently help people with the problems that can happen between 9 and earlier and 10 and greater. And we'll talk in a bit about that. But that's why I'm doing the talk back to what was new. I mean, so the title is What's New in 10, 11, or 2016 that you may have missed. And somebody's giving me beef, you know, about saying, how can you say what's new about 10? But my reply was, well, what's is a contraction. So it's what is new in 2016 and what was new in 11 and 10. So, you know, they're new to some people. That's the bottom line. They may not be new to you, but they're new to some people. And let me say this too, because I'm sure some of your audience are in this camp. And I know, Michael, you've seen this over the years. We've all seen it. People might be on, let's say, 10 now and move to 2016, or they might be on 11 now and are planning to move to 2016, or they were on 10 and they're moving to 11. And so they're already, quote, on 10. But if we asked them, hey, what was new in 10? They'll go, I don't know. I'm just doing my job. I'm just keeping the app running. I mean, we didn't change anything when we ran on 10. Like, you know, they might have jumped from 8 to 10 at that point and skipped 9, and they have no idea what was new in 9. And, you know, that just translates into people over the years frequently who've been on whatever release in the past, and they have no idea what's new in that release. And we talked a bit about this last week, and it, you know, in my experience, it's that people are heads down doing their job. And when a new release comes out, I'd say the majority of people, they're not even going to pay attention to it because they're trying to do their job. They're trying to keep what they've got running. They may be adding new capabilities based on functionality requirements, you know, business requirements, but they're not necessarily jumping at some new feature. So they'll often miss out on what was new because they're just not paying attention when that release came out. So let's just, you know, put numbers to things. So CF 2016 obviously came out last year, and they chose to use that nomenclature so that there's no more confusion like this, I think. 11 had come out in 2014. And 10 had come out in 2012. Well, if you were, you know, working on, you know, 9 when 10 came out, or 8, or if you're working on 10 when 11 came out in 2014, you weren't paying attention when in 2014 Adobe was doing many presentations, and people like me were doing presentations at conferences, and people writing blog posts and sharing their experience. Lots of people in the community share their pros and cons. There are certain folks in the community that do like to dive into the new stuff and want to share their experience. And my point is that people would often just not be paying attention. They're just doing their job. They're not worried about what's new in the current version because they're on the older version. So
Right.
This is all about trying to level people up and saying whatever you've come from, and even if you're not yet on 2016, if you're on 11, then you'll learn in this talk about what was new in 11 and what was new in 10 that you might have missed. And you'll see what's new in 2016 that might motivate you to go to the next release. And that's often a part of why I do these things, is to kind of restate for people what were the features, because sometimes it's lost in all the different resources that are out there. And they are sometimes on that older version, and somebody in the organization is kind of hesitant to move to the new one. And if I can give them more ammunition to understand what is in the new one, or what the pros and cons are, what the challenges might be, then they might be more either motivated to move up, or they'll be able to, use that as ammunition to get whoever's holding them back to allow them to move up. So yeah, I believe that there's plenty of value for everybody really to review this information wherever you stand in your experience with them.
Yeah, because, most of the new features in CF10 are still in CF 2016, if not all of them.
Yep, exactly.
So,
exactly. Nearly all of them.
Yeah, so the new features in CF10, new features in CF11, and the new features in 2016 may all be useful things that you could use in your apps today.
Absolutely. That's exactly why we're doing it. So now you get it. There you go.
And just for the folks who are wondering why they should even bother to upgrade, a few months ago, CF10 went end of life, which means there's no new hot fixes. So any security holes that get found in that now are not going to be hot fixed, and you're going to be wide open. And that's been true for CF9 for over a year now, I think.
Right. Couple of years
now. So that's a good reason. Even if you don't need any of these new features, I'd highly recommend no one runs software that's gone end of life, because there's so much hacking stuff going on now. It's just a recipe. It's like driving a car and not getting your brakes fixed when they don't work, and just crossing your fingers that you'll
my wife and our critters have just come into the room. She's not used to me being on video, so she didn't realize that in coming into the room she was on video briefly. So there she was. I was trying to wave her off, saying no, but she just doesn't get it because I'm usually only on audio with headset. You don't have to worry about wandering in. So it was a sweet, brief moment. Some people have seen her at conferences. Kim, that's my wife.
I've met Kim a number of times.
Absolutely. So that you made a good point, is that some people will need to get moving to more modern releases because Adobe's not updating 10 or 9 anymore. So that's definitely another important reason, for sure. Absolutely. And so in the course of this presentation, I'm going to go through, for each of the releases, 10, 11, 2016, I'm going to talk about what the major features were, the ones that Adobe tends to promote, and then maybe some that maybe you didn't even notice them promoting, but I think are worthy of considering major. And then I'll talk about key minor features. And of course, that's just an arbitrary distinction, major versus minor. I'm just having to choose so I don't have a screen full of stuff. And then I'm going to talk about administrator features, because some people don't do development and they don't care about language-oriented features. They just care about how's it going to affect their job as an administrator. Or you have both roles, and people tend to focus on the language features and the product capability features. But as an administrator, there's often things that are very important that you understand. So we'll talk about those administrator features. And then, of course, very important, especially since 10 and above, is security features. So for each release, I'll talk about key security features that are different in that particular release. And some of you know that 10 in particular, Adobe tried to make several improvements related to security, and then they've done more with 11 and more with 2016. And then
and hats off to Adobe for doing that.
Amen. Absolutely. Because they got a lot of grief from people for not having taken such good care. And some of it's about making it just easier for you to be in a more secure environment. We'll talk about that. And let me back up and say, I don't know how much you really want to go over everything. I don't think we have time, in this podcast
No.
interview for us to go over everything. So I'm going to leave some things out, but just drawing, the big picture, that was a big feature of 10. And I'll talk about that as one of the major features, but then I'll focus on it. And also in each release, whatever other security specific things, because many people now realize how important it is for us to stay up on security. And then you mentioned previously how I've done talks on hidden gems. So yeah, in every release, I would do a talk within that year of it coming out of hidden gems, because Adobe and other people would tend to focus on the major new features, but I would read the tech notes, the release notes, the documentation, or scour other people's blog posts, and I'd find all kinds of hidden cool little things that people weren't knowing about. And again, those may be the things that make you go, that's the reason I want to update. I don't need those other major features. We'll never use them. But boy, that one little thing that's like nobody's talking about, that's the thing I've been waiting for. And then I'll also point out how in each release, when you do those updates, and one of the features of 10 is an automated update mechanism. And in those updates, sometimes Adobe slips in a new feature once in a while. So I'll talk about key changes per updates. And then, as you mentioned, I'll talk about licensing changes in each release. And there are some variations in them. And let me just say out of the bat, because some people didn't know this, it was introduced in 9. That back in 9, Adobe changed the licensing agreement in a very positive way that many people never noticed because they don't read it and somebody else buys it. You don't need to buy a license of ColdFusion to serve as a testing server. Now you might say, oh, you mean the developer edition? No, I'm not talking about the developer edition. The developer edition's been free, since CF6 or 5, I think. But I'm not talking about the developer edition. I'm talking about you are licensed according to the end user license agreement to take your license key for your production license and put it on any other server you want to use for testing or centralized development, staging. So yeah, you can do that. And that's not new in 10, 11, or 2016. That was introduced in 9. But I will throw out that in 10, 11, and 2016, there have been some modifications to the wording. So it was a little free in 9. And then in subsequent ones, it's been more like, I believe the current thing is like, if you're on standard, if you've bought 2 standard licenses, you can take one of them. So let me just say, I'm not going to get into the details now, but you should read the end user licensing agreement, the EULA, E-U-L-A. If you just Google ColdFusion EULA, put in whatever version you want, and you'll get that EULA. It's a PDF. Usually it's about 10, 11 pages of significant stuff. And usually there's only a couple of key pages that address this issue or VM issue or cores issues, cloud deployment issues. Those are all covered, and I'll highlight them. But again, we could do a whole presentation just on the licensing changes from one release to the next and go into various scenarios. We don't have time, obviously, but I'll be covering that. And then I'll wrap up with compatibility.
And I just want to say on the end user licensing, I'm still waiting to know exactly how you do the licensing on Docker containers with ColdFusion.
Yep. Yeah, they have not
haven't heard. That's been an issue for over a year now, and it hasn't been addressed. So if anyone from Adobe's listening, hey guys, it's 2017. Docker is here. It's time to get the licensing clarified.
Yep. So I don't recall there being specific reference to containers as a generic term in the EULA. But I will say, I don't know if I've looked at it specifically for that recently. So, I look at all of these and sometimes they blur together. But that's what somebody would want to do, is look for the phrase container. And if it's not in there, then yeah, press Adobe to get that in there. And so I was about to say that the last point I would make about each of the releases would be compatibility issues and some gotchas that I or other people have tripped over, so that you can be aware, because that's sometimes a big showstopper in moving to a new release. Is everybody makes it sound like, oh, there's all these great new features, and then you run into this one thing that, oh, crap, that doesn't work for us. Now, I will say that often it's a pretty small thing. I mean, it might affect every page in your application, but it might be something that you can fix in one, fell swoop, either a configuration issue or maybe something in your application CFM or CFC. So even though it may seem like your site is dead and can't run on the new version, it's pretty unusual for it to be that significant. Now, there are some other things here and there with different features. And again, that's what I'll cover in the talk about 10 and 11 and 2016. And then
cool.
to learn more, because obviously I won't have time to cover all this stuff, and I'll point at the end of each section what you can learn about that release and where.
Yeah, and I'll link into the show notes. You've written some really great articles on your blog about new features and hidden gems in all these versions.
Sure.
So I'll put
Yep, and I've
links.
got all the presentations I've done in the past on hidden gems. They're all there on my website. And then when this one's done, so Thursday, I believe, Thursday or Friday, the schedule's changing just a little bit because of some issues. But anyway, so either Thursday or Friday, when I give it, I'll post the presentation. So those who are not attending, you'll be able to go get the PDF with everything on it, including the resources. So, yeah.
That's great. Well, that's really generous for you to do that. And you've got, must be hundreds of presentations on your site now.
And articles, and blog posts.
I'm looking at your presentations page, and it looks like you've got 124 presentations you've done, which is incredible.
Scroll down there and look at the bottom of the list. You might recognize something.
Number 1, version
Where
control.
Where did I give my first?
MDCFUG.
There you go.
Maryland ColdFusion User Group. Yeah, I do recognize that.
A couple years before you took ownership, I forgot now the name of the guy who ran it back then. It was 97,
yeah.
97, I think. What does it say there? I'm not looking at the page. Was it 98?
This is 98, yeah. But
98. So I think you took it over in probably 99.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, 99 sounds about right. I'm
shortly
spacing on the guy's name, but yeah.
But yeah, so that's, and you'll see that among the earliest presentations I was doing, or earliest articles I was doing, was hidden gems in ColdFusion 401. So, this is
yes. Yeah, you've been doing this stuff for years, and it's some really cool stuff. I am kind of blown away. It's like there's so much value in those articles and prezos.
And we were talking last week in our other interview about the other presentation I'm doing about, just as a side issue, that people ought to not dismiss old resources like that. Even if they're 10, 15 years old, you might find that what they talk about is just as valuable today. I mean, sometimes, again, people are so busy doing what they do that they miss out on something that was new in a release that they were working with 15 years ago, and they didn't pay attention to what was new then. And all these years later, they didn't even know that feature was there because it was some little hidden gem. So yeah, check that out.
Yeah, I think it's important to do this. I'm going to put there's a product matrix on Adobe's site that tells you all the end of life of ColdFusion and all the other Adobe products. And I think it's important to pay attention to that, because if you're running CF11, there is an end of life coming up, I think next year, if I remember right. Now I want to go check.
Well, normally
you want to be upgraded, and
let me just throw out there,
upgrade well before that. Yeah, sure.
The pattern has been that it used to be that they kept the 2 previous releases open. So if, when 10 came out, 9 and 8 were still supported. I think there was some time where they switched then from 2 to the last one. So now, we're down to, and then for a period of time, that's what it is. So it was that when a given release came out, right then, the 2 releases ago, like when 11, or let me say 10, when 10 came out, 8 would no longer be supported. And then they started changing it a little bit in a very relatively positive way, where they kept the support going into the end of the year. So when 10 came out, 9 didn't get dropped until the end of the year. Sorry, it's fading on me now too. But what we can say, for instance, is that 2016 came out in February of last year, but 10 wasn't dropped when it came out. Support for it didn't end until May of this year. So,
well, it has to be said that the upgrade from 10 to 11 was not handled in the best possible way, perhaps. So
maybe, 10 to 11?
Yeah.
What are you thinking of?
I seem to remember people held off on upgrading it. Maybe I'm confused on the version, but...
Well, I would say 9 to 10, and this is something that I'll talk about in the presentation. So with regard to 9 to 10, one of the big... I mean, that was the one where Tomcat ColdFusion was changed from running on JRun as it had for 6, 7, 8, 9. It was
Mm-hmm.
changed on Tomcat in 10. And while on the surface, that should be something that's transparent to us, the fact was it changed a lot of stuff. And one of the key things it changed was the web server configuration. For those, who've got to set things up, how you connect IIS or Apache or Nginx to ColdFusion, that's the web server connector. And there was a big change in the connector between 9 and earlier and 10 and above. And that connector caused a lot of grief. First, just getting it properly configured when you had 9 and earlier on a box with 10 or later, and that can still happen to you today. And then second, there was this notion of tuning the connector, which was introduced in 10. And it wasn't well understood at first. And so Adobe came out with blog posts in 2012 and then 2014 talking about this need of tuning the connector. And those blog posts they're big. I don't think they're as clear as they can be. And you'll see there's hundreds of comments on them as people wrangled with this issue. So I think that's perhaps what you're thinking of is, the jump between 9 and 10 caused a lot of consternation. And the good news is that a lot of it has settled down. 11 made significant improvements in aspects of the connector. 2016 has made even more, and I'll talk about that, how there's some very important kind of automated, beneficial changes to the connector in 2016. And that's one of those things where, I lament that sometimes people do hear news like what you shared, and they are of the opinion that, it's just going to be painful. And then, that may be true with respect to 10. And then they don't realize that 2016, Adobe specifically addressed that and made things better and made it more easy to configure and better suited out of the box to most people's configurations. But if you don't hear that, they're not going to talk about that being a major new feature. It's one of the hidden gems, but it's what would make moving to 2016 all the more compelling, and it would supersede this painful memory, that might be holding people back thinking, I don't want to go to 10 or 11, as an example, just throwing that out.
That's a great point, Charlie. The other thing that occurs to me is that, the JVM gets changed underneath between some of these versions. So,
but I'll talk about that in the section on, because it's generally on the updates. So when a given release comes out, it'll support whatever the latest JVM is at time. So when 10 came out, it was running on a variant of Java 1.6 at the time. And then when 11 came out, it was running originally on a 1.7. And then when 2016 came out, it was running on a Java 1.8. And as some of you know, by way of updates, they eventually do let you move to the next release of the JVM. So during the CF10 timeframe, I think it was update 14, I can't remember, added the ability for you to move from 1.6 to 1.7. I may be remembering that incorrectly, but I know with 11, it originally was on 1.7, and then they came out with an update that allowed you to go to 1.8. And now 2016 just comes out on 1.8 out of the box, and 9 is about Java 9. And I've heard they're going to stop calling it so it's not going to be Java 1.9, it's going to be Java 9. And of course, some people already call it Java 1.8, Java 8, and Java 1.7. But apparently the nomenclature is going to change. But you're right, there are changes over time with regard to what update of the JVM is supported. And just to throw this out, because I had a conversation with a client today about it, Adobe has been telling us since CF7, I could find you a tech note from CF7 timeframe, back when the daylight savings time change happened, which I think was like 2003, 2002. They came out with a tech note where they said, you can now go to the latest point release of whatever JVM we support. So back then they were on like 1.4, and it was allowing you to go to any 1.4 that at the time Sun came out with. And that's been true ever since. So if somebody's running on, say, CF10, they could absolutely be on the latest Java 1.7, because I do believe it was 10 came out with 1.7. It was just probably a very early one. But they couldn't go to 1.8 unless Adobe specifically supported it. And I don't think they did, for instance, in 10 or Java 1.8. I may be wrong, because it just also does fade away. But I've got various points about it in the presentation, and there are always blog posts. And in fact, I'll just say that anybody that's really interested in that particular issue, just Google ColdFusion Java versions, and one of the first results you're going to find is a couple of blog posts that Adobe did, and they specifically went through at the time they wrote that blog post and said, here's for 9 what you can do, here's for 10 what you can do, and 11 what you can do. And I don't think they've updated it for 2016 yet, but so they've addressed it. So it's a good point, and it is something that sometimes trips people up. And I'll mention it in passing. It wasn't something I had on top of my head to remember exactly what I'm talking with you.
What about the updaters? New features come out in those, or are they just security? Or?
Absolutely. And it's on all kinds of levels. I mean, obviously there's bug fixes. And let me just tell you, because some people don't appreciate this, if you were to look at the recent fixes for 2016, CF11, even CF10, and in the presentation, I'll give you links to the pages where you can find all the updates for each release. And I'll just tell you that if you just Google ColdFusion Updates, I'm pretty sure that one of the first results will be the pages for 10, here's all the updates. 11, here's all the updates. 2016, here's all the updates. And if you look at them, at each one, you'll find that not for every update, but for several of the updates of each release, a great majority of them, they'll be doing 100 bug fixes or more. And people sometimes lament that, Adobe's dragging their feet on bugs, and there's bugs that have been there for years. And I grant all that. I know that's true for some situations, but I don't want people to miss the fact that, say, for instance, in CF10, there have been at least a few hundred bug fixes. Now, of course, some people will use that to say, well, that's because they made such crappy software. That's why they need bug fix. No, but some of these were old things that were finally being brought forward. They were issues in 9, and now they're fixed in 10. Or now in 11, they were issues in 10, and they were fixed in 11. And sometimes they're backported to the previous release, and sometimes they're not. Like things being done for 2016 and 11, they won't be backported to 10. But that's just one more reason to consider moving up to 11 or 2016. So yeah, there's often lots of updates. I mean, there have been 4 for 2016 and 14, I believe, or 13 for CF11, and I think 24 for 10. And yeah, whatever release you're on, you want to be on the latest available update, and you want to read the tech notes to see what's changed. And sometimes it's many, many bug fixes. That's what I was getting at. But sometimes it is new features, and that's what I'll be highlighting in the talk is if there's some new feature that was added. And once, I'd say about 3 of each of the release of the updates for each of the past releases has had some features where it's literally new functionality. And I'll throw out as well that sometimes they also pull functionality. So just recently, one of the updates, or no, it was the new installer for CF 2016 in December of 2016. They came out with a new installer, and it already pre-configured to have update 3 in it. So you didn't have to worry about applying updates 1 and 2. It just came with 3. But in that installer that came out in 2016, December 2016, the end of the year, they removed some JavaScript libraries used for the UI features. Now, a lot of people poo-poo those UI features, the calendar and the windows and the tabs and things like that. And some people are going to go, well, what? They're getting rid of that? Well, they did say, and I'll talk about this too, they did say that in 2016 they were deprecating some of those things that some people have complained for years nobody should be using. But, pragmatically, lots of people use them. Well, Adobe did say when 2016 came out, and I've got a whole blog post, if you just Google ColdFusion 2016 deprecated features, you'll find Adobe stuff and my stuff, and they talked about this. But curiously, in December, they came out with this new installer, and they literally yanked out the YUI, Yahoo UI libraries. They also got the Spry and the Portlet libraries, but hardly anybody used those. But they literally yanked out the YUI libraries, which would be to some people's delight to see that's finally happening. But if you're somebody who's got code that's relying on them, you'd be like, what? My stuff's broken. Well, the good news is look at the tech note that came out with that update, or the blog post that came out at the time from Adobe. They do offer you a link to get those libraries and add them back. So if you rely on that YUI library, you can put it back. It's a curious approach. It's deprecated and then kind of forcefully obsoleted, but then you can put it back. It's the first time I've ever seen them do something like that. I almost wonder if it's a licensing issue where they weren't allowed to include it, but you're allowed to go get it. Maybe, I don't know. So, but that's just another facet of how during the life of a given release, sometimes things do change. Usually it's about updates. This was one that was during the actual implementation of a new installer. So yeah, you can see there's a lot. And that leads then into the compatibility issues. And let me just throw out a couple key things that just to highlight, because again, we're not doing the whole talk in this presentation, this podcast interview, but one of the big gotchas when people move to 11, and it would help hit you if you move to 2016, is charting. And I'm sure some people are going, oh yeah, we had a heck of a time with the charting. So the charting engine was changed. In 10 and earlier, it had been Web Charts 3D, and in 11 and above, it's, it slipped my mind. Greenpoint? Anyway, I'll have it in the presentation. But the point is, it's all hidden from us. We don't need to know. It's just new. And Adobe tries to make things backwards compatible, but unfortunately they kind of missed the boat on some charting issues. Now, let me say too that there were issues that were fixed in bug fixes. So sometimes people, I've worked with a lot of people where they're running with the original installed version and they never do the updates, and they're complaining that things don't work, and Adobe fixed it in an update, and you just haven't applied that update. And then conversely, of course, if you go to, say, 2016, you'll get in 2016 everything that was fixed at the time that it came out in 2011. So that's CF11. So it's always worth going to the later releases. But there are also often compatibility issues, and I'll highlight some of the key ones. That was a couple. And there's some ways to get around some of them, and there's some things specific to that one. So, again, we'll talk more about that later. If you look into it now, you'll, of course, trip over it and find out more about it on your own.
And it looks like they changed the Zing charts.
That's it, Zing charts, right.
Yeah.
So it went from Web Charts 3D to Zing charts, and that's a good thing. One of the things about it is that Zing charts does all its configuration based on JSON, and the previous one did all its stuff based on XML. So in the release, they came out with, and it might be 10, for I can't remember right now, but they came out with like an XML to JSON BAT file or SH file for those on Linux. And you were able to convert the XML files to the JSON that was needed by the new tool. So, but people don't read the docs, right? They just try to run their code, and if it doesn't work, then they start Googling. And just beware, sometimes when you Google stuff, you're going to find answers from people that maybe are referring to something from years ago, or their experience is really rather limited, and they're not giving you the complete answer. So you might miss that there was this tool to do this conversion, and that might have been a simple answer to the problem that you're having. So again, I'll talk about lots of different, not lots, but I'll talk about the key different compatibility issues that I've seen as people have made the migrations.
I just want to pick up on the bug fixes part, because although some people might get upset that bugs are fixed and they're listed in the release notes, I think that's actually a good thing that they're publicly saying what bugs have been fixed. So if you were having trouble with it, you can know that the cause of the problem has been fixed. And I also just want to appreciate Adobe for having a public, bug database, because that didn't turn up until about 10 years ago.
Yep.
When I and some other people applied some pressure to them.
Yep. And it used to be called bugbase.adobe.com, and now it's called Tracker. And it's improved. It's still not great. I just can't believe how painful it is to search, because it's got all these fields, and you can't just say find this particular word in any of those fields. It doesn't work that way. So it's sometimes painful to find stuff. And then, there are some things that have languished, but there's also things that get fixed. I mean, let me just throw out for some people's interest that, for instance, one of the updates recently, the latest updates for CF 2016 and 11 broke a feature where you could have a calendar pop up. Some people used it as just CF input type equals date field, and some people used it inside a CF calendar. But that thing started breaking after those latest two updates of the two versions on certain browsers. And shortly after that, a bug fix came out, and it's available. And in fact, I just blogged about it today because I'd had another client run into it, and I didn't get it too often, so I hadn't really thought about blogging it. But after two people brought it up, I thought, hey, let me point it out, because you may not go digging through the blog through the bug tracker. But that's Michael's point is, you ought to at least try the bug tracker, look at it, tracker. Just Google ColdFusion bug tracker, you'll find it, and look for whatever you're dealing with, because you might find that there is a bug fix. And of course, Adobe will roll that fix into the next update. But until then, we don't know when the next update will be. You could maybe get a quick fix in place. And that's what I talk about in that blog post today.
Well, and I mean, I highly recommend people apply the updaters when they come out, but not everyone does that.
No, and some people are reluctant to, because they've seen, for instance, like this. Here's an example where a feature got lost, and it wasn't intentional. So some people will go, yeah, we're going to let other people be the bleeding edge, experience, what goes on. And so we'll wait. So I understand that approach. Each has its value. Other people will go, well, we need any security updates that are incorporated. We need them immediately. And so, you can always look at the tech notes about the updates, and if they have security fixes, that might prompt you to get it done sooner. And, Oracle solved that problem in a way that I know Dave Epler has pleaded with Adobe to consider, where they come out with one update that has just the security fixes in it. And if that's all you want, you apply that. And then they have another update that it's one number above it. You see it often when you go looking at the Java downloads. You sometimes see on the single download page 2 versions, and you're like, what's up with that? And they're one number apart. And the difference is the lower number is just the security updates, and then the higher number is security updates plus bug fixes and maybe feature changes and things like that. And then people can say, well, we want the security ones. Adobe hasn't yet done that, but I will say that what they do sometimes do is if you look at the tech notes, you'll find, hey, this update just has security stuff in it. But it's not like they're intentionally splitting them that way. And of course, something could come along one day where they've got a bunch of improvements, and then there's a big security thing that has to be slipped in. And so all of a sudden, it's going to be both security features and bug fixes and updates. So yeah, that could be done better. But like you said, for most people, it's generally a good idea to just apply the update, and they're easy to undo. And let's just throw that out, because I'll mention that in the talk about one of the major new features in CF10 was that at least it is now easy to apply updates. It's a single click that generally works well. Some people it doesn't work well, and I've got a whole blog post on if it doesn't work well, because there's reasons why that can happen. But my point is, you could try it, and if something doesn't work out because of a compatibility issue or whatever, you can easily uninstall the update. It's as easy to uninstall them as it is to install them. And for most people, it's just a 2-minute job and a restart of the instance. And if it ever goes wrong, check out my blog post. Just Google for ColdFusion update, problems, and you should find my blog post about that, or reach out to me and I'll help you, because when they don't work right, you can think, oh goodness, CF is toast, I've got to reinstall. No, it's not that you need to reinstall. It's just that you need to usually just stop CF and apply the update manually. A lot of people don't know how to apply updates manually, but I talk about that in the blog post, and it's just another couple minutes and you're done. So you can safely apply and even uninstall updates. And so there's lots of stuff to learn about this stuff. And I understand that some people just don't do this stuff for their living, and they just want to be programming or, just supporting their users and not even changing anything. And they don't want to learn how to do troubleshooting. So that's why I and you guys and other folks out there do troubleshooting for a living, because it's not everybody's cup of tea, and we can focus on it and try to get in, solve your problem, get out. That's what I do.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing you do. And, I think it's important, because if you don't, you focus a lot of your time on solving these problems, and it means you're far more likely to have seen a similar problem before.
Yes.
And even if you haven't seen the exact problem before, you know ways to diagnose what's going on and figure it out. Whereas,
yeah, it's amazing. Once in a while, I'll have somebody present a problem, and I'll go, I've never seen that one before. But if you want to, spend 15 minutes to half an hour looking at it together, I often can solve it, because I just have a problem-solving perspective and certain diagnostics, and also just years of experience of knowing what should be going on when things don't work right. I can usually take that as evidence and connect the dots in a way that maybe somebody couldn't, even if I've never seen it before. But you're right. When we see these things over and over, it becomes very simple. I mean, I have people who tell me that sometimes they've been spending days or weeks trying to solve a problem before they learned that I could be available to help them. And I fixed it in a half an hour, and they're just like, I can't believe it took us a whole week to try, and you fixed it in a half an hour. But it's just because that's all I do all day. And then I try to share it. I put a lot of this stuff out in blog posts or conference presentations, but sometimes I'm just too busy and I don't get a chance to. So the good news, though, is that I leverage it and quickly solving the problem. So I can often fix some problems in less than half an hour, and I don't have any minimum, and I have a satisfaction guarantee. So look forward to helping anybody if you've got any problems. That's what I do from this chair.
Excellent.
Talking to this computer.
Yes. There we go. Right from the heartland of Kentucky.
And again, let me say that I'm not the only one. There are others. Michael and his company does it. Mark Kruger and his company does it. Pat Quinn and the folks at CFusion Web Apper, they do it. And in fact, Mike Brunt, I mean, I could go on. There's several folks, so I don't want this to sound like a sales pitch for me. And on my CF411.com site, which we talked about on the last interview, if you go to CF411.com/CF Consult, CFCONCULT Consult, CF Consult, I have a list of about 7 or 8, 9 people and companies that do this sort of troubleshooting. And then I've got another list of people that do development, like TerraTech also does development. I don't, but some of these companies do troubleshooting, also do development. So yeah, check that out.
I'll put those in the show notes too. We'll have a complete index of your site if we keep on talking.
I'll just point to the big list and you'll see it. But yeah, that's enough. That gives a good taste of what the presentation is going to be about. And some
fabulous. Well, you'll be flying out to DC for CF Objective in a few days. Driving? Oh, right.
Yeah, you wouldn't drive from Peru, but I'm going to drive from Kentucky. My wife and I. It'll be about a 11-hour drive from Kentucky. But
wow, 11 hours.
Because we have, that's our home. We grew up there, and we go back to see family, holidays and stuff. So we're comfortable with that drive. And it just gives us flexibility, and we're going to be bringing some stuff back. So that's why we're driving this time.
Yep. Well, it is Peru today. It could be the United Kingdom next month, or Thailand, or wherever I happen to be in the world. So,
excellent. You're awfully cold down there in Peru right now. You want to get some warmth soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll warm up a bit, but I'm going to Europe in a month's time, so it'll be warmer there.
Be nice by then too.
The ideal virtual travel schedule is you arrange to have summer in the north and vice versa. So you never have the winter. But I haven't quite got that.
I made a big mistake when I worked in Australia back in 95, 96, back in my first IT career. It was in mainframe database stuff. And it was the end of that career, about 12, 15 years into it. And I was invited to come to work down in Australia with their Department of Social Security at the time. And it was one of the biggest databases in the world, and it was a really cool opportunity. But I left in like April of 95, which was, winter was just ending here, and it was just starting.
Oh, man, you got the double winter?
Yeah. And then I came back in July of 96, and so I had, again, missed out on much of summer and spring and had gone through winter there. So, yeah, I agree with you. You can time it. At least that's not as bad as the first time I went to work in the Middle East in Qatar. Sometimes I have some work in Qatar. Doha is their capital city. And the first time I went there happened to be in August. And August in the desert, let me tell you, it's hot. And I didn't know what to expect in terms of the culture of the work environment. And so I wore a jacket and carried my laptop, and I walked from my hotel about a mile. And
my God.
I was drenched. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I don't think people walk there.
Well, I've learned that. Although I've also gone during nicer times of the year, and it's beautiful to walk around. And I'm sure some people are thinking, "What? The Middle East, Qatar? Are you crazy?" And it's lovely. It's a lovely city, Doha, Qatar. It's beautiful. If you Google it, any of you guys are interested, Google Doha. Click on the images button in Google, and the pictures. The city is amazing. It's very modern, and the people are lovely, and it's a great place to go if you've never been to the Middle East. And Dubai and Abu Dhabi are close by, and those are the very modern also places where you can find all kinds of the biggest stuff in the world, the highest stuff in the world, the
highest building. Yeah.
Yeah, right. All that. The Burj Khalifa.
I was in Dubai, and they have the shopping mall, and they have an indoor ski slope in the middle of this heat. So,
They do.
and they had an aquarium that was so big, it was like more than 100 feet across and 40 feet tall. They had live sharks swimming around, and they had people scuba diving in the aquarium.
Yep.
So it's quite a sight.
That's a nice visit sometime too. My wife and I got to do that the last time we were there last year, and we did both of those things. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, highly recommend it. Never been.
And the other thing, I just to go off on this travel thing, because I have a kind of little goal to visit every country on the planet, but haven't quite. I think I'm on country 55 at this point. But if you're flying like an airline, if they go through a city, like Emirates obviously goes, it's the United Arab Emirates airline, so it always stops in Dubai, no matter where you're going, typically.
Yeah,
and that you can basically get a free stopover.
Yeah,
or maybe it's $50 if you stay
make
for a
long
days.
layover. Sure, exactly.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you that,
that's a great way to visit new countries.
Sure. And do they offer anything to help you specifically? Because I'll just say that I know in Doha, which again is the capital of Qatar, they're both just on the other side of a peninsula in Saudi Arabia. But in Doha, their stopover, the state and city have put together an official kind of a thing where if you've got like a 4-hour stopover, they've got buses ready to take you out on a tour and go to the markets and to see the museum. And they really want to intentionally help you get out and enjoy briefly for low cost an opportunity to travel around in the city. So yeah, I'd definitely recommend that.
Yeah, a lot of places have that, and if you go to the airport website, often you can find a link to find that kind of thing. I know when I was in Seoul and South Korea, and they had like the same kind of thing. If you only had a few hours, they could whisk you into Seoul. You could see all the cool stuff and then come back. So
nice. And of course, we want to recommend that people take advantage of, if they're coming to CF Objective later this week, when you're in DC, there's so much to see. And it's been great to see the organizing committee. They've been tweeting, if you haven't been seeing it, they've been tweeting about lots of great ideas of things to do and see while you're there. And we talked about this on our last interview. There's so much in DC that's free and close. It's walking distance. So hopefully everybody will get out and take full advantage of that.
And for the people who can't make it physically, there's also CF Week coming up real soon.
Right,
I want to say it's next
right.
week. Yeah,
Developer
which is.
I think they announced it like that, and then they corrected it that I think it's more in August. But check out blog.coldfusion.com. It was a recent blog post. I'm not positive myself.
That's a free educational thing that Adobe provides, so anyone can go to that.
Yes, sir.
Cool. Well, really appreciate you being on the show again, Charlie. Have a fun drive to Washington, D.C., and hope both of your talks go well. The other talk being on
spiders. Our spiders
right?
Eating your server.
Unexpected load. Yes.
We were talking about it. And let me also throw out, I'll be at the Integral booth for Fusion Reactor. So if folks are come by and see the Fusion Reactor booth, I'll be watching that for them because they were unable to make it this time. But I'll have their stuff there and answer questions and show off Fusion Reactor while we're there.
Yeah, and I think the ColdFusion community owes a thanks to Fusion Reactor because they sponsor basically all the different conferences. There's like half a dozen conferences this year on ColdFusion, and I'm pretty sure they're a sponsor at every single one.
Yep.
So
great guys. They're just really great guys, and that's why I've been working with them since Fusion Reactor came out in 2006, 2005, I think is when it started. But from the first time I interacted with them, they were just wonderful guys, and I've really enjoyed working with them. And again, other vendors in the community, I don't mean to denigrate anybody else. They're all good people, but I've just developed a really strong relationship with them. And I don't work with them, or for them, but I do work with them. And it's really just because I love their products and how they do things. So yeah, definitely recommend people check those tools out.
Great. Well, thanks again, Charlie.
Thank you for doing what you do, sir. Will we see you there?
Not this time. Maybe a future year.
Okay.
I was Into the Box, so
Right.
But,
sure.
Yeah.
Alrighty, man. Well, until the next time, thanks again for what you're doing.